I hadn't heard my mother's voice in over 8 years, and if I'd had my way, I never would have heard it again. But when my phone lit up with her name, Mom, do not answer, something in me paused. Curiosity? Morbid reflex? I let it ring. Then I picked up. "Hi, Mark," she said, like we'd just spoken yesterday. "We're so excited to see you at Jason's wedding." I blinked, completely thrown. "What are you talking about?" "Oh," she said, all sugar and condescension. "I thought you knew. We decided to have the wedding at your house. It's perfect. The garden, the patio, the photos will be amazing. We already sent the invitations. Don't worry, you won't have to do anything." My mouth went dry. "You sent invitations? With my address?" "Of course," she said. "It's already out. Everyone's thrilled. It'll be lovely, Mark. Try not to make this about yourself." She hung up before I could say anything else. I stood there for several minutes, phone still in my hand, as waves of confusion, disbelief, and boiling fury surged through me. My house, the one I built from the ground up with my own 2 hands after they disowned me for being gay, was being hijacked for a wedding I wasn't invited to. Jason, their golden child, the boy who could do no wrong. He used to pin me to the floor and spit in my face, and Mom would call it boys being boys. When I came out at 17, they said I was dead to them. Literally. They told relatives I'd run off with drugs. I spent 10 years clawing my way out of the wreckage they left behind. Now they were coming back, not to reconcile, not to apologize, but to use me like a wedding venue. I pulled up the wedding website. Sure enough, celebrating Jason and Melissa, June 15th, 3 p.m., Mark Sheridan's estate. A literal photo of my front gate was the banner. I was still reeling when George, my partner of 4 years, came home. I showed him the site in silence. He scrolled, jaw clenched. "They didn't even blur the address," he said. "Mark, this is insane," I finished. "It's trespassing. It's delusional. It's criminal," he added. "They're counting on you freezing. Like you always did." That last line hit me harder than I expected. Because he was right. They always knew how to paralyze me, with guilt, shame, obligation. But that version of me was long gone. I decided I'd contact the wedding planner listed on the site, just to see how far this madness had gone. Her name was Rachel, and she was immediately flustered when I called. "Oh, Mr. Sheridan." I thought this was all approved. "It absolutely was not," I said. "Who gave you permission?" "Your father sent me a signed property agreement." I asked her to forward it. When it hit my inbox, I opened the PDF and felt the blood drain from my face. There, on the bottom of the document, was my signature, or a very convincing forgery of it. My father had forged my name. I didn't sleep that night. I paced the living room, opening cabinets, checking my mail pile, searching for anything else that felt off. And that's when I found it, a statement from an old credit card I hadn't used in years. $14,892.70 in new charges. I skimmed the vendors: catering, furniture rentals, a floral design studio in Napa. My hands started to shake. I looked over at George, curled up on the couch, worry all over his face. "They stole from me," I said quietly. "They're using my house, my name, and now my money." He got up, wrapped his arms around me. "Then we burn it all down." I didn't want revenge. At first, I just wanted my life back, my space, my money, my peace. But when I started digging, I found something much worse than stolen shrimp cocktail and fake flower arrangements. I found out they had taken everything. The first step was freezing the credit card. Then George and I went to our lawyer friend, Jessica. We showed her the forged signature on the venue agreement. Her response was immediate. "This is felony-level fraud. And if they used your identity for financial transactions, that's grand theft." I was still clinging to some faint, ridiculous hope that maybe this was all just a mistake. Maybe my father thought I'd be okay with it. Maybe my mother would finally call again, this time to apologize. But the next day, I got an email from an estate lawyer named Thomas Wexler. The subject line made my stomach twist. "Final distribution of estate, Helen Goddard." My godmother. Helen had passed almost a year ago. She was the only adult from my childhood who'd ever stood up for me. When I was kicked out, she found me a place to stay. When I graduated from architecture school, she showed up with champagne and tears in her eyes. I'd named a room in my house after her, Helen's library. I clicked the email. It contained a brief apology for the delay in final disbursements and a notice of funds transferred to the estate's primary beneficiary. That name? Robert Sheridan. My father. I called the office immediately. "There's a mistake. I'm Helen's godson. I was told she left me a significant inheritance. The assistant hesitated. It says here the check was issued to Mr. Robert Sheridan. He presented a will notarized, naming him as sole beneficiary. I felt sick. Can you send me a copy of that document? She did. I didn't need to be a handwriting expert to know it was fake. Helen had never called him Robert, only ever that smug bastard. She didn't even like my parents. She used to slip me extra 20s just so I'd never have to ask them for help. The forged will was dated just a week before she died. It was typed in Courier New, her name misspelled twice, and Sheridan was written with a lowercase s on the first page. Amateur hour. The amount listed, $200,000. I showed the document to Jessica, who exhaled slowly and said, "Okay." This just escalated. Meanwhile, George called in reinforcements, his uncle Victor, a retired judge who now ran a legal advisory group. Victor took one look at everything and said, they didn't just cross a line. They jumped off a cliff. My father had forged a will, faked my signature on a venue contract, and charged nearly 15 grand to an old card he must have stolen from my college things. And they still hadn't called me to explain. I did something then that I hadn't done in years. I opened the Dusty family email thread, a cursed chain of political forwards, chain letters, and cloying Jason updates. I sent one message to the entire group. Subject, wedding at my home. Dear family. I was not consulted about the decision to hold Jason's wedding at my home. The use of my address, likeness, or identity in planning materials is unauthorized and illegal. Further, I have discovered credit card charges and forged documents linked to this event. Legal action is underway. You are all hereby notified. You do not have permission to use my property for any event. Attempted trespassing on June 15th will be met with law enforcement. Do not contact me again. I hit send. 5 minutes later, Jason called. I didn't pick up. Then he texted, "Seriously? What the hell is your problem? You're ruining everything." No apology. Just entitlement. That was Jason in a nutshell. A few hours later, Melissa, his fiancée, messaged me on Instagram. It was oddly polite. "Hi Mark. I'm sorry for any confusion. Your mom said you'd agreed to everything. I really wanted to meet you. I'm sorry this is happening." I stared at her message for a while, torn. She sounded innocent. But she'd agreed to marry Jason. She'd printed my address on her invitations. She hadn't asked for permission, just forgiveness, after the fact. I didn't respond. Instead, I poured myself a drink, sat by the window, and watched the last rays of sun disappear behind the hills. I felt grief, but not for them. I grieved for the version of me that still wanted to be loved by these people. That version was gone. Now, I was angry. Now, I was focused. It wasn't enough to stop them. I was going to make them pay. I took the next week off work. My firm understood. One of the perks of being your own boss and designing million-dollar homes is that when you say family emergency, no one asks for proof. The first thing I did was start pulling every document I could find connected to my godmother's estate. She had once emailed me a scanned copy of her will, the real one, years before she died. I dug through old email backups and finally found it, dated 2017, notarized, and naming me as the sole beneficiary. I printed it out and laid it side by side with the one my father had submitted. The contrast was laughable. Hers was clean, professionally prepared. His was a Frankenstein mess with inconsistent spacing and mismatched fonts. Jessica stared at both and shook her head. This isn't just forgery. It's inheritance fraud. If we move fast, we can file a petition to freeze any remaining assets from Helen's estate and start civil proceedings. Good, I said. Because I'm done being polite. We filed the petition within 48 hours. Victor helped us draft a cease and desist letter that went out to every vendor, planner, and photographer associated with the wedding. The legal tone was sharp enough to cut glass. George handled the pride angle. He was part of the organizing committee for LA's Queer Arts Festival and had been trying for years to find a high-profile venue for a satellite event in our part of California. The second I floated the idea, his eyes lit up. "You're not just blocking their wedding," he said. "You're creating something beautiful in its place." We announced the event, a celebration of chosen family, queer art, and resilience, for June 15th. The same day, the house that was once going to be hijacked for performative vows and mediocre wine tastings was now going to host drag poets, young queer artists, and an open-air gallery curated by LGBTQ+ creatives who had been rejected by their families. We titled it, "The Home We Built." I'd never felt more purposeful. The logistics were intense. Portable restrooms, stage rentals, Sound checks, permits. George and his team handled the chaos like pros. We even rented the adjacent field to accommodate parking and overflow. Meanwhile, Jessica filed a civil fraud complaint against my parents and Jason for identity theft, credit card fraud, and estate manipulation. She served the papers 3 days before the wedding. According to the Courier, my father turned white. My mother reportedly cried and said, "How could he do this to us?" To them. Never once had they said, "How could we do this to him?" But the crowning moment came when we spoke to the sheriff's department. With the evidence of forged signatures, stolen inheritance, and the blatant trespassing attempt, we had legal grounds to request enforcement officers on site for the wedding day. They approved it. June 15th arrived. By 9 a.m., our home was alive with color. Flags fluttered, music floated on the breeze, and 1,000 glittering details transformed the house into something more than a protest. It was a sanctuary. The place I'd built alone was now filled with people who understood what it meant to be unwanted and how powerful it is to reclaim space. I stood on the patio, dressed in a tailored vest, watching as young volunteers hung artwork along the trellises. That's when I saw the caravan pull up. 3 black SUVs. Guests in pastel dresses and designer sunglasses. My mother in a floral hat, Jason in a gray suit. Behind them, confused caterers and photographers trailing like lost sheep. George stepped beside me, smiling. Showtime. They approached the gate, now secured by private security and flanked by 2 uniformed officers. My father pushed forward, already red-faced. "I demand access to my son's property," he barked. One of the officers calmly handed him a copy of the civil order. "This property has been leased for a permitted private event. You've been notified. You are not welcome here today." Jason stormed toward the gate. "Mark, what the hell is this? This was supposed to be our wedding." I walked up slowly, flanked by George and Jessica. I looked Jason in the eye and said, "No, this is my home. And today, it's a celebration of people who actually deserve love." He started to say something, I don't know what, but just then, music swelled behind us. A group of kids were performing a spoken word piece about rejection and rebirth. A cheer went up. Cameras flashed. The guests behind Jason began to murmur. Melissa stood there silently, staring at the event unfolding on the other side of the gate, the joy, the color, the authenticity. And then she turned to Jason and said, "You lied to me." She took off her ring and dropped it in his palm. Then she walked away. Jason just stood there, dumbstruck, as Melissa slipped past the crowd, back to her car, and drove off. His friends tried to comfort him, but the entire wedding party was paralyzed, stuck on the wrong side of the gate, the sound of laughter and applause echoing behind them. My mother burst into angry tears, flapping her hands at my father, who was now arguing with the officers, waving the fake venue contract like it was a golden ticket. For the first time in my life, I felt nothing. No guilt, no urge to back down, not even the old, familiar ache of rejection. All I felt was a clean, bracing calm, the kind that comes right before a storm breaks in your favor. I didn't have to say a word. George handled logistics with the officers, checking IDs and making sure only ticketed festival guests came inside. Jessica snapped photos of the trespassers, documenting everything for the court case. Victor, in a crisp navy suit, strolled the perimeter, quietly greeting law enforcement, reminding them of our rights as lawful tenants for the day. The next few hours played out like something between high drama and slapstick. A few of Jason's friends tried scaling the fence and were gently, but firmly, redirected by security. My parents' lawyer arrived and threatened emergency legal action, but after reviewing the evidence, leases, court orders, emails, the cease and desist, he quietly slunk away. Vendors started demanding their deposits from my parents, who could only stare helplessly, realizing the rug had been ripped out from under them. Inside, the Pride Festival thrived. Queer artists sold paintings and zines. I gave a short speech about chosen family, and was met with a standing ovation that left me breathless and a little unsteady on my feet. People told me stories about getting kicked out, about building new lives, about hope. Someone even thanked me for giving them the homecoming they never got. When I finally took a break, I watched the scene from a second-floor balcony. I saw my parents, Jason, and a scattering of wedding guests still gathered by the gate. They looked small, stranded, unable to accept that the old order was gone, that their control was broken forever. I remembered Helen's words the last time she visited. "You get to choose who you open your doors to, Mark. Blood isn't thicker than water when the well is poisoned." By evening, most of the wedding party had given up. The limos left first, followed by a trickle of relatives and old family friends. Jason tried one last time, called my name, pleaded for just one conversation. I watched him, and all I felt was relief. "You did this to yourself," I said, not loudly, but clear enough for him to hear. "You all did." He just shook his head, face blotchy with anger and loss, and walked away. That night, after the last of the guests left and the lights faded, George and I sat on the patio under string lights, listening to the distant sound of owls and the wind in the olive trees. For the first time in years, I felt something close to free. But the real fallout was only beginning. The next morning, my inbox exploded with emails, some angry, some begging, some threatening legal action. There was a furious voicemail from my father. Jason's business partners emailed, furious about the negative press and breach of contract. Even my mother tried, in her old passive-aggressive way, to guilt me back into submission. But the genie was out of the bottle. The evidence was gathered, and the cameras from the festival, dozens of phones, a hired videographer, and local news captured everything. The truth, finally, was undeniable. And I wasn't letting it go. The next few weeks played out like a slow-motion train wreck for my family, and for the first time, I didn't look away. I'd always been the one to disappear, to avoid confrontation, to let them rewrite history in their own favor. But now, with the paperwork filed and the whole circus caught on camera, I had no reason and no desire to hide. The first blow landed fast. Jessica filed the civil suit. The court order was airtight: photos, emails, video evidence, forged signatures, and a timeline that mapped every act of fraud. The judge not only granted an emergency injunction against any further attempts to access my property, but also froze the remaining assets from my godmother's estate pending full investigation. Word spread quickly in our community. It wasn't just the festival that went viral. People loved a story of poetic justice, and the internet ran with it. Within a week, someone posted the wedding fiasco to a local subreddit. The headline read, "Family tries to hijack gay son's house for wedding, gets shut down by epic pride festival instead." Thousands of comments poured in, many from people sharing their own stories of estrangement and stolen inheritance. Some even offered pro bono legal support, wanting to help however they could. Jason's fiancée, Melissa, went public, too. She posted a carefully worded statement on social media, confirming she'd ended the engagement and was deeply disturbed by the lies she'd been told. She apologized to me directly, publicly, and told her friends she wanted nothing more to do with the Sheridans. That's when the dominoes really started to fall. Jason's business, already on shaky legs, lost its biggest investor, who cited concerns about ethics and reputational risk. When his clients found out about the fraud suit, they pulled out. Within a month, his company filed for bankruptcy. Suddenly, all the smugness was gone. All those years of being the favorite, protected from consequence, and it unraveled in a blink. My parents didn't fare any better. Their friends, shocked by the publicity, stopped answering calls. The legal bills piled up. Jessica made sure of that. With my evidence, Victor's legal strategy, and a very vocal internet cheering me on, the case moved quickly. My parents' lawyer tried to settle, but Jessica refused. She knew they were desperate. In depositions, my father broke first. He tried to justify the forged will, saying Helen would have wanted the money to stay in the family. But the real will was now in the court's hands, notarized and clean. The judge didn't buy a word of my father's defense. My mother tried a different tactic: public sympathy. She reached out to relatives and old friends, painting herself as the victim of a bitter, vengeful son. But nobody wanted to be involved. Too much evidence, too many eyes watching now. Through it all, I felt a strange sense of peace. The urge to explain myself, to argue for my own worth, was gone. The people who mattered, my chosen family, my friends, the queer artists I'd welcomed into my home, never needed an explanation. They knew who I was. In the end, it wasn't about winning. It was about truth. One evening, as the sun set over the empty garden, George and I sat together with Jessica and Victor, going over the final paperwork. "You know," Victor said, "not many people would have had the nerve to see this through. You made a home, Mark, and now you're protecting it, not just for yourself, but for everyone who needs to know it's possible." I nodded, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. The pain, the betrayal, the years spent in exile. I finally understood. The greatest revenge wasn't destruction. It was building something better in spite of them. The legal storm grew, swallowing up every corner of my parents' world. Every week, there was some new development: a deposition, a hearing, another letter from Jessica outlining just how airtight our case was. The forged will, the credit card fraud, the trespassing. It all stacked up until even their own attorney admitted they were out of moves. It wasn't just the courts. News had traveled beyond our county. A local TV station picked up the story, framing it as both a cautionary tale and a celebration of found family. The Pride Festival's footage ran on the evening news, a montage of rainbow flags and smiling faces. My home transformed into a beacon of defiance. My parents hated the attention, but there was nowhere left to hide. The judge made his ruling on the estate. The will my father submitted was declared invalid, a product of fraud and manipulation. The entire $200,000, what was left of it, at least, was to be returned to me, plus damages and legal costs. But the fallout didn't stop there. Jessica had filed a civil claim for emotional distress, and the judge agreed. The public spectacle, the years of estrangement, and the family's coordinated deception had all left deep scars. He awarded punitive damages, far more than I'd expected. In total, over $2 million. The court ordered my parents to sell their home to cover the costs. Jason was named in the judgment, too, forced to surrender any claim to the estate and pay restitution for his role in the fraud. His business was already gone. Now, his credit was ruined, and any hope of bouncing back disappeared. I thought I'd feel triumphant, but mostly I felt exhausted. There was no joy in watching my family unravel, only a heavy sense of inevitability. The truth was, even if they'd never been caught, I still wouldn't have belonged to them. The courts didn't just rule in my favor. They held up a mirror to the family I'd lost long before this fight ever began. Some relatives tried to reach out, offering half-hearted apologies or awkward attempts at reconciliation, but I let those messages sit unread. I had nothing left to say to anyone who only believed me now that it was public. The festival had sparked something, though. Emails began pouring in, from strangers, from young people estranged from their own families, from artists and writers who saw themselves in my story. A nonprofit reached out about partnering on a grant for LGBTQ+ youth. Even Melissa sent a handwritten note, thanking me for showing her what integrity looked like when it really mattered. I put most of the money in a trust, earmarked for a grant in Helen's name, the Goddard Fellowship, for young queer artists rejected by their families. I worked with George and his friends to build the program, hosting open studios and retreats at the house that once symbolized only loss. For the first time, my home felt truly alive, filled with laughter, music, and hope. When I spoke at the first fellowship awards, I looked around the packed living room and realized I hadn't just reclaimed my inheritance. I'd finally built the family I needed all along.